Hello, I'm Lawrence and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to words, specifically the words that each country gave to the English language. And during these unprecedented times, the nerdy portion of my brain has been thinking about which words are going to make Word of the Year this year. I know that's sort of the last thing we should be thinking about right now, but it's the sort of thing that pops in my head right before I go to sleep. And as I said in a tweet this morning, I think that the word of the year for 2020 will not just be the virus itself, but the sort of the words we're using, the concepts we're using to combat it. So, you know, social distancing, flatten the curve, don't buy as much toilet paper. That's an entire sentence. But perhaps there's a way to glean some clues from our past. A lot of people have been talking about the 1918 Spanish flu and how that affected the world population, and I'm interested to see how it and other events of the time affected the English language, specifically American English. And so in order to find out, we need to turn the time circuits on and go back in time and see which words were coined in America in 1920. So let's set the scene here. You know, just a year prior, the Spanish flu, which may or may not have started actually in Kansas, spread around the world, and of course people were getting sick. And so at this time in history, perhaps it's no surprise that people were coming up with very silly childlike words to describe the feeling of being sick. And one of those was Icky Boo. It is first attested from 1920. It sort of had a short shelf life, right? But it did evolve into the word icky, which of course we still use, particularly in US English to this very day, just to mean either that you're feeling icky, right, or that something is icky, that it's gross, it's not very nice. Interestingly enough though, and this also speaks to the sort of the time period that we're talking about, during the Jazz Age, the word icky also evolved momentarily into a word that fans of swing music would use to decry other forms of jazz, as in, that is icky, I'm not listening to that. Funnily enough, a similar word with an opposing meaning did pop up around a similar time, and that word was tickety-boo, which I think we more associate with British English, and of course that meant you were feeling fine, which is the direct opposite of what you'd be feeling if you encountered the following. Murdery. What on earth is a murdery? Well, it's not a sports official that goes around killing players. It was, in fact, during the 1920s and briefly thereafter, a word to describe a female murderer. Now, of course, it did have a very short shelf life. In fact, it never really took off because we already had the word murderous, right? And more commonly, you'll just hear female and male murderers described as murderers. So it just goes to show that just like Icky Boo, not all words stand the test of time. On the other hand, our next entry would have its time later down the road. When I think of the word widget, I think of two things, right? So just sort of an unnamed kind of thing that you might use as a gadget, so gadget being another word, or a computing term that means a kind of application that you might use when, you know, building a website or something like that. But the word, of course, predates the computing age. You know, a lot of sources told me that it dates back actually to 1924 to a play called Beggar on Horseback. But I found it in a literary piece from 1920, and that literary piece was this. And yes, it was called Queerful Widget. It was a different time. But in that book, there is a character called Queerful Widget, and another character asks, but what's a widget? And Queerful Widget says, oh, that's the biggest secret that ever was. I'm the only one in all the world that ever knew what a widget is. And given that we apply the word widget to something we don't know the name of, this would seem to be a very good candidate for the likely origin of the word, and perhaps gave rise and influence to its use in the later play from 1924. But the question of which book from 1920 gave us the following word is not in any doubt. T-shirt. A t-shirt is, everybody knows what a t-shirt is, right? It's those things that 20% of us are wearing on conference calls right now. And funnily enough, before 100 years ago, they didn't even have a name. And that name was given to us by one very particular human being. And that person was known, among other things, as the husband of Zelda Fitzgerald and the writer of the 2013 Leonardo DiCaprio film, The Great Gatsby, as well as the book on which it's based. In fact, just the book. That's right, American novelist F. Scott Fitzgerald is credited with coining the word t-shirt. It pops up in his book, This Side of Paradise in 1920, in which it says, Amory, provided with 6 suits, summer underwear, 1 sweater or t-shirt, set out for New England, the land of schools. And hopefully I've schooled all of you in the knowledge of where the word t-shirt came from today. Now, I like to think that F. Scott Fitzgerald had a friend called Gerald and often pondered whether the t-shirt fits Gerald. That was really awful. Now, in a fashion sense, it did take a while for the word to catch on in English just in general, but from about the 1940s onward, you did start seeing it used quite a lot in written text, and of course today we use it probably more than ever, which is more than can be said for our next entry. Now, I know what you're thinking, petting, that's in really wide use today if you have an animal and if you live in America, because in Britain we say stroking. Either way, it could be construed as quite weird because petting used to have another meaning. In fact, it still does on some swimming pool signs in Britain, as in no petting in the pool, no kissing in the pool. And it's that specific usage that's first attested from 1920 in American English. So clearly it's not just British lifeguards that are coy. Now, as is a running theme with this list, the word petting in this sense is first attested from a book, again from 1920, and that book's name, you won't believe this, is This Side of Paradise by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I can only think that by 1920, you know, Spanish flu had happened, World War I had happened, and F. Scott Fitzgerald just wanted to make up for lost time by adding words to the dictionary, and by kissing people. Zelda, hopefully. But in This Side of Paradise, you will read on the triangle trip Amory had come into constant contact with that great current American phenomenon of petting. It's like he sort of made up his own young person's language within the confines of this book, and then it sort of made it into the real world, much like this. The word wicked, a positive meaning of the word wicked to mean wonderful or nice, fell into use in 1920, and maybe this was a turning of the corner, right? You'd got all the kind of crap, horrible sort of events out of the way, and now the roaring 20s were here. Of course a word like this was going to show up, and the 1920s was a different time, you know, because right now, words that are entering the English language are usually doing so via the internet. Back then it was another written form, once again, books, or should I say book, because, and this is getting stupid at this point, the word wicked in this sense is also first attested from This Side of Paradise by F. Scott Fitzgerald from 1920. Oh yeah, that young person slang shows up in this book yet again when it says, "Tell 'em to play admiration," shouted Sloane. "Phoebe and I are gonna shake a wicked calf." Now that is a precursor to the Bostonian phrase wicked good. But, you know, doesn't it really just sound 1920s? The only thing that's lacking is a cocktail in somebody's hand. So with that in mind, bring on our next entry. De-icer doesn't really do it for me, but if you have some rum, we could use that. We could also use it to make one of these, a daiquiri, and that's something that you could order in restaurants to this very day. I rather like a strawberry daiquiri when I'm in the mood. But the word dates back to the 1920s because of course it does. Furthermore, the word dates back to a book from 1920 because double of course it does. In that book it says, "Here's the old jitney waiter, if you ask me, I want a double daiquiri," and that book was This Side of Paradise by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Now, by all accounts, the drinks themselves, which are sort of a family of rum-based cocktails, rum, no de-icer, put it away. Put it away, were around before 1920. They just didn't have this name, and the name apparently comes from a rum-producing district of Cuba. And I don't know if F. Scott Fitzgerald spent a lot of time in Cuba, or if he just looked it up on Google. What I do know is a wordsmith like Mr. Fitzgerald probably wouldn't have coined the following. That said, if any word on this list would have made Word of the Year in 1920, it's this one, the word normalcy. Before 1920, Americans, just like the Brits do to this very day, would have used the word normality. But a certain presidential candidate by the name of Warren G. Harding used the word normalcy by accident, kind of as a malapropism, in his campaign slogan of that very year. The campaign slogan being a return to normalcy. But what it indicated was precisely that, a return to normality or normalcy after the horrors of World War I and potentially even the Spanish flu. Harding won that presidential election and the word normalcy took off in American English, whereas it just didn't in Britain because he didn't run in our country. So that's his fault, not mine. But for my country and your country and every country around the world, may we 100 years later return to normalcy soon. That's it for this episode. Let me know in the comments below which words from 2020 I'll be doing a video on in 100 years' time. I'll be dead by then. Don't forget to keep up with my amusing musings on Twitter, which you can do at Lost in the Pond US. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so that my videos don't get lost in the pond. That would be tragic at this point. And during these unprecedented and frankly weird times, we are deeply thankful for the support that we get from our patrons who make this channel absolutely possible. From the technology to the words that come out of my mouth, I'm like a slot machine. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond. Anyone who does so will get access to our secret live stream, and anybody who pledges $5 or more a month will get access to not only that, but my secret podcast and more. Until next time, keep watching, keep laughing, and keep your t-shirt on. Bye! Thank you for watching this episode of Lost in the Pond. Don't forget to hit my stupid little face to subscribe, and please share this video with the world. Hit me up on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and if you would like to support this channel, please do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond.